Rebecca Anderson had always preferred the silence of dawn. At 5:30 a.m., she'd slip out of her modest ranch house in Cedar Creek, Texas, make coffee in her small kitchen, and watch the sun paint the horizon through her window. The routine grounded her, predictable, peaceful, ordinary. After 6 years in a specialized military unit that officially never existed, ordinary felt like a gift. Her nephew, Jake, 17 and stubborn as a mule, would shuffle into the kitchen an hour later, grabbing cereal and backpack in one fluid motion. "Morning, Aunt Becca," he'd mumble, still half asleep. She'd ruffle his sandy hair, the same color as his father's had been before the accident that took both his parents 3 years ago. "Drive safe," she'd call after him, the same words every morning. It was their routine, small, simple, safe. Rebecca worked part-time as an administrative assistant at Cedar Creek High School, filing paperwork and answering phones. Her colleagues knew her as the quiet woman who never missed a deadline, always volunteered for after-school events, and somehow made the worst coffee taste decent. They didn't know about the sleepless nights when desert winds still howled through, her dreams, or the way her hands sometimes trembled when doors slammed too loud. The silver ring on her left middle finger was the only hint of her past, a small band etched with cryptic letters that meant nothing to civilians, but everything to those who'd earned them. She'd twist it when anxiety crept in, feeling the familiar grooves worn smooth by nervous fingers. Most days, she managed to forget about the woman they'd once called Angel of Kandahar. Most days, Rebecca Anderson was enough. But Jake had other plans. "There's this shooting competition at Lone Star Range," he announced one Thursday evening, dropping a crumpled flyer on the kitchen table between them. "Annual county championship, big deal around here." Rebecca glanced at the colorful paper advertising prizes, trophies, and Texas-sized bragging rights. Her stomach tightened. "That's nice, honey. You should enter." The words hung in the air like smoke. Rebecca set down her fork, studying Jake's earnest face. "I don't think that's a good idea." "Why not? You're always telling me to face my fears, try new things." His voice carried that stubborn edge she knew too well. "Besides, what's the worst that could happen?" "You have no idea," she thought, remembering the weight of a rifle in her hands, the split-second decisions that meant the difference between coming home and being carried home in a flag-draped box. "I'm not really ready for that kind of noise." "All day," she said carefully. Jake leaned forward, his expression softening. "Aunt Becca, you moved here to start over, right? But you can't hide forever. These people don't know you, which means they can't judge you for what you used to do. Maybe it's time to show them who you really are." That night, Rebecca lay awake staring at the ceiling fan's lazy rotation. Jake's words echoed in her mind, mixing with older voices, her commanding officer's final words. "You earned your place here, Anderson. Don't let anyone tell you different." The next morning, she found the flyer on her dresser where Jake had strategically placed it. The registration deadline was today. At lunch, she sat in her car in the school parking lot, staring at her phone. Her finger hovered over the range's number. Around her, students laughed and shouted, so young and fearless. When had she become so afraid of her own shadow? The call connected on the third ring. "Lone Star Range, this is Tommy. Hi, I'd like to register for the county shooting competition this Saturday." A pause. "Sure thing. Name, Rebecca Anderson. Any prior shooting experience, ma'am?" Rebecca twisted her ring, feeling those familiar grooves. "Some." "All right then. You're all set. Entry fees $50, payable at the gate. Competition starts at 9 sharp. After she hung up, Rebecca sat in her car for another 10 minutes, wondering if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her quiet, new life. That evening, Jake whooped when she told him. "I knew you'd do it. This is going to be awesome." Rebecca managed to smile, but her hands shook slightly as she reached for her water glass. Some fears, she was learning, never fully went away. They just waited in the shadows, ready to test how much peace you were willing to fight for. Saturday was 2 days away. 2 days to prepare for a confrontation she never wanted with a part of herself she'd tried so hard to bury. Walking into the lion's den. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of brutal Texas heat that made the asphalt shimmer. Rebecca sat in her sedan outside Lone Star Range, air conditioning humming, watching men unload expensive rifle cases from lifted trucks. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary. Through the windshield, she counted at least 30 vehicles, mostly pickups adorned with hunting decals and military support stickers. Groups of men clustered around tailgates, comparing equipment and swapping stories. Not a single woman in sight. Her phone buzzed, a text from Jake. "You got this, Aunt Becca. Remember what you always tell me. Courage isn't the absence of fear." She smiled despite her nerves. The kid threw her own advice back at her regularly, usually when she was trying to talk him out of something dangerous. Today, it might actually help. The range entrance was a weathered wooden building with a hand-painted sign and an American flag snapping in the hot wind. Rebecca grabbed her small gear bag, borrowed ear protection, eye guards, and a few protein bars. She'd decided to use whatever rifle the range provided rather than reveal she once owned custom weapons that could thread needles at impossible distances. The moment she stepped inside, conversations quieted. Not stopped, just dropped to that conspiratorial whisper level that meant she was definitely being discussed. The building smelled like gun oil, leather, and masculine confidence. Behind the counter, a wiry clerk with sun-weathered skin looked up from his paperwork. His name tag read, Tommy, the same voice from her phone call. "You the lady who called about registration?" "That's me, Rebecca Anderson." Tommy slid a clipboard across the scarred counter. $50 entry fee. "You'll need to sign the waiver, provide ID, and confirm you can handle a firearm safely." As she filled out the forms, she became acutely aware of the stares. A group of older men near the coffee station made no effort to hide their skeptical glances. One wearing a cap covered in fishing lures nudged his buddy and whispered something that made both chuckle. "First time at Lone Star?" Tommy asked, processing her driver's license. "Yes." "Well, it's a friendly crowd mostly. Competition's divided into brackets based on experience. You shooting regularly?" "Not lately." The understatement of the century. Tommy handed back her ID along with a numbered badge. "Your shooter, 43. Competition starts in 30 minutes with practice rounds. Good luck, Mom." Outside, the Texas sun felt like walking into an oven. Rebecca made her way toward the practice area, passing clusters of participants who sized her up with undisguised curiosity. She caught fragments of conversation, never seen her before, thinks she can just walk in, probably saw it in a movie. At the equipment table, a range officer with impressive biceps and a no-nonsense expression handed her a well-used rifle. "Know how to handle one of these?" "I'll manage." He raised an eyebrow at her confidence but said nothing. The rifle felt familiar in her hands. Weight, balance, the faint scent of gun oil that triggered a cascade of memories she tried to suppress. "Lane 15's yours for practice," the officer said. 20 minutes, then we start the real show." Rebecca found her assigned lane and attempted to set up quietly. The moment she shouldered the rifle, testing the sight alignment, a voice called out behind her. "Whoa there, sweetheart." She turned to see a tall man with a swagger that screamed local expert. His cap advertised a hunting supply store, and his smile carried just enough condescension to set her teeth on edge. "Name's Roy Patterson," he said, extending a hand she reluctantly shook. "Couldn't help but notice your stance there. Might want to adjust before you hurt yourself. I appreciate the concern, but—" "No shame in accepting help," Roy interrupted, stepping closer. "This isn't exactly beginner-friendly territory. Most folks here have been shooting since they could walk." Around them, other shooters had paused their own preparations to watch. Rebecca felt the familiar heat of unwanted attention, the same feeling she'd had in briefing rooms when officers questioned whether she belonged on certain missions. "I'll be fine," she said evenly. Roy's smile never wavered, but his eyes hardened slightly. "Suit yourself. Don't say I didn't warn you when you're nursing. A bruised shoulder tomorrow." He walked away, but the damage was done. The whispered conversations resumed with renewed energy, and Rebecca caught the unmistakable tone of amusement at her expense. She turned back to the target, checking her breathing, finding that centered calm she'd learned in places where hesitation meant death. The rifle felt right against her shoulder, familiar, comfortable, deadly accurate when needed. But today wasn't about deadly accuracy. Today was about surviving whatever test this crowd planned to put her through. A buzzer sounded, and the range officer's voice boomed across the field. "Practice session begins now. 20 minutes, people. Make 'em count." Rebecca closed her eyes for a moment, twisted her ring once for luck, and prepared to give them just enough skill to avoid embarrassment, but not enough to reveal who she really was. Not yet. The first practice shot cracked across the range like thunder. Rebecca's bullet hit the target's outer ring, decent for a novice, disappointing for someone who'd once eliminated threats from triple that distance. She deliberately aimed wide, testing the rifle's tendencies while maintaining her cover. "Ouch!" came a voice from behind. "Might want to aim for the paper next time." Snickers rippled through the nearby lanes. Rebecca ignored them, chambering another round. This shot landed closer to center, still deliberately imperfect, but showing improvement. A reasonable progression for someone learning. "Better," Roy Patterson called out, though his tone suggested anything but encouragement. "Keep practicing, you might hit something important eventually." The 20-minute practice session felt like 20 hours. Every shot she fired drew commentary, most of it wrapped in false helpfulness that barely concealed mockery. When she adjusted her stance, a micro-movement that would be invisible to most observers, a man in camouflage immediately offered unsolicited advice. "Your left foot's too far forward," he announced loudly enough for half the range to hear. "And you're gripping too tight. Rifle's gonna jump like a scared cat." Rebecca knew her stance was textbook perfect, refined by instructors who'd forgotten more about marksmanship than these weekend warriors would ever learn, but correcting him would raise questions she wasn't ready to answer. "Thanks for the tip," she said instead. During the break before official competition began, Rebecca found herself increasingly isolated. Participants clustered in groups, sharing stories and comparing equipment. She sat alone at a picnic table, sipping water and trying to center herself. That's when she noticed the phones. At first, it was subtle, a few guys taking what looked like casual photos of the range. But she caught the telltale angles, the way they positioned themselves to capture her in the frame. Her military training had made her hyper-aware of surveillance, and this felt uncomfortably familiar. "Excuse me," she said to one young man who was obviously filming her. "Could you not?" He shrugged, not bothering to lower his phone. "It's a public event, lady. Freedom of speech and all that." "Freedom of speech doesn't cover filming people without consent." "Actually it does," Roy Patterson interjected, appearing beside the young man with a smirk. "Public place, Public event. Besides, what's the problem? Worried about looking bad on camera? The challenge in his voice was unmistakable. Rebecca felt her jaw tighten but forced herself to remain calm. I'd just prefer privacy. Privacy? Roy laughed and several others joined in. You entered a competition, sweetheart. Kind of defeats the purpose if nobody watches. The humiliation was calculated, deliberate. They wanted her rattled, wanted her to either storm off in tears or blow up in anger. Either reaction would confirm their assumptions about emotional women who didn't belong in their testosterone-fueled world. Rebecca stood up slowly, meeting Roy's gaze. For just a moment, something flickered in her expression, a hardness that made him take an involuntary step back. Then it was gone, replaced by that same quiet composure. You're right, she said. It is a competition. I guess we'll see how it goes. But the phones kept rolling, and by the time the first official round began, Rebecca suspected she was already becoming some kind of social media joke. The thought made her stomach churn, not from embarrassment but from anger she couldn't safely express. The first round of competition involved shooting at 50-yard targets, elementary for someone with her background, but she maintained her charade of competent mediocrity. Her shots landed in respectable groupings, close enough to center to avoid complete humiliation but far enough out to reinforce their assumptions. Not terrible, one observer grudgingly admitted. Beginner's luck, another countered. After the round, while scores were being tallied, Rebecca overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. I looked her up, a younger man was saying, showing his phone to Roy, Rebecca Anderson, administrative assistant at the high school. No competition history, no hunting licenses, nothing. Figured as much, Roy replied. Probably watched a YouTube video and thought she could play with the big boys. Should we tell her this isn't a charity event? Nah, let her figure it out the hard way. Sometimes reality's the best teacher. They laughed, and Rebecca felt something shift inside her. The careful control she'd maintained began to crack, not into anger, but into something more dangerous, determination. She thought about Jake's words. Maybe it's time to show them who you really are. She thought about every mission where she'd been underestimated, every briefing where officers questioned her capabilities, every time she'd proven them wrong with quiet excellence. Most importantly, she thought about the ring on her finger and what it represented, not just her past, but her refusal to let anyone diminish her worth. The second round was about to begin, target set at 100 yards. Rebecca walked to her assigned lane, shouldered the rifle, and made a decision that would change everything. Time to stop pretending. The 100-yard targets looked like postage stamps in the distance, but Rebecca had engaged threats at 5 times that range in conditions that would make these weekend warriors curl up in terror. As she settled into position, muscle memory took over, feet positioned perfectly, breathing controlled, finger resting lightly on the trigger. For the first time all day, she allowed herself to shoot properly. The rifle cracked, and her bullet punched through the target's second ring. A collective intake of breath rippled through the spectators. It was still short of perfection, but the improvement from her earlier shots was dramatic enough to turn heads. Damn, someone muttered. Where'd that come from? Rebecca chambered another round, made a microscopic adjustment for windage, and fired again. This bullet landed even closer to center, part of a grouping that would make competitive shooters nod with approval. Roy Patterson stepped closer to her lane, his expression shifting from amusement to something sharper. Interesting, he said, loud enough for others to hear. Guess she was just warming up. But there was suspicion in his voice now, and Rebecca realized she'd miscalculated. In her desire to push back against their mockery, she'd revealed too much too quickly. The smart play would have been gradual improvement over several rounds, not this sudden display of competence. During the break, she found herself under increased scrutiny. Conversations quieted when she approached, and she caught several participants, studying her with new attention. The dynamic had shifted from dismissive amusement to wary curiosity. "You're full of surprises," said a gravelly voice behind her. Rebecca turned to find an older man with steel-grey hair and intelligent eyes watching her. Unlike the others, he didn't carry himself with that aggressive swagger. His posture suggested military bearing, and when he extended his hand, his grip spoke of decades holding weapons. "Robert Hayes," he said. "Mind if I ask where you learned to shoot like that?" The question was polite, but probing. Rebecca sensed he'd already guessed part of the answer. "Here and there," she said carefully. Robert nodded, accepting the evasion without pushing. "Good trigger discipline," he observed. "Whoever taught you knew their business." Before she could respond, Roy Patterson inserted himself into the conversation with characteristic subtlety. "Robert, meet our mystery shooter," Roy said, his tone carrying an edge. "Seems she's been holding out on us." "Is that right?" Robert's eyes never left Rebecca's face. Sometimes people have their reasons for staying quiet. The exchange felt loaded with subtext Rebecca couldn't quite pass, but she sensed Robert's comment was meant as some kind of protection. Roy's jaw tightened, but he didn't press the issue. The third round pushed targets out to 200 yards, and Rebecca faced a crucial decision. She could continue the gradual reveal, maintain some mystery while proving she belonged. Or she could abandon, caution entirely, and show them exactly what they were dealing with. The choice was made for her when she overheard a conversation that ignited something dangerous in her chest. "Bet she's got some sob story," one of the phone-wielding spectators was saying. "Divorced, trying to prove something to her ex. Or maybe daddy issues. You know how these types are." "Either way, she's about to hit a wall," his companion replied. 200 yards separates the pretenders from the real shooters. My money says she falls apart now that the pressure's on." They were filming again, phones pointed at her like weapons, waiting for her inevitable failure. Rebecca felt her composure crack in a way that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with cold, calculated resolve. She'd spent 3 years trying to bury the angel of Kandahar, convincing herself that quiet Rebecca Anderson was enough. But these men had made one critical error. They'd forgotten that some women only looked soft until you pushed them too far. Rebecca stepped up to the firing line, shouldered the rifle, and found her breathing rhythm. The target swam into focus through the scope, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to remember what it felt like to be perfect. The first shot hit dead center. The second shot touched the first, expanding the hole imperceptibly. By the third shot, a hush had fallen over the entire range. Roy Patterson's face had gone pale, and even Robert Hayes looked impressed, despite himself. Rebecca could feel the phones recording, but this time she didn't care. Let them film. Let them post their videos online. Let them learn what happened when you underestimated the wrong woman. She fired her remaining shots with methodical precision, each bullet finding the same impossible target. When the buzzer sounded, her target looked like it had been hit by a single, devastating round. In the stunned silence that followed, Rebecca lowered the rifle and turned to face the crowd. Her expression was calm, almost serene, but her eyes held a warning that made grown men take involuntary steps backward. "Any other shooting tips?" she asked quietly. Nobody answered. The scoreboard told the story in stark numbers. R. Anderson, 10 consecutive bullseyes, 200-yard precision round. The name sat at the top like an accusation, impossible to argue with or explain away. Rebecca could feel the shift in the crowd's energy. The casual mockery had evaporated, replaced by a tension that crackled like electricity before a storm. Whispered conversations buzzed around her as she calmly cleaned her borrowed rifle, methodical movements that spoke of ingrained habit. "That's not normal," she heard someone mutter. "Nobody shoots that clean without serious training." "Military has to be," another voice added. "But what kind?" Roy Patterson approached with Charlie Webb, a local businessman who'd been among the louder voices earlier. Both men wore expressions, somewhere between embarrassment and suspicion. "Ms. Anderson," Roy said, his earlier condescension replaced by wary respect. "That was, impressive shooting. Mind sharing where you picked up those skills?" Rebecca set down the cleaning rod and met his gaze. "Does it matter?" "Well, yeah, it kind of does," Charlie interjected. "This is supposed to be a friendly competition. If you're some kind of professional, that changes things." "I'm an administrative assistant at the local high school," Rebecca said evenly. "Check my employment records if you want." "That's not what I meant, and you know it?" Charlie pressed. "Nobody develops that kind of precision filing paperwork." The crowd had formed a loose circle around them now, phones recording every word. Rebecca glanced at the devices, then back at Charlie's flushed face. "What exactly are you accusing me of?" "Nothing," Robert Hayes interjected, stepping between them with the authority of someone accustomed to diffusing situations. "Charlie, the lady? Signed up same as everyone else. Her shooting speaks for itself." "But that's just it," Roy said, frustration bleeding into his voice. "It doesn't add up. This morning she could barely hit the target. Now she's shooting like—" He trailed off, searching for the right comparison. "Like what?" Rebecca asked quietly. The silence stretched uncomfortably until a younger shooter, barely old enough to compete, spoke up from the crowd. "Like a sniper." The word hung in the air, like a smoking bullet. Rebecca felt something cold settle in her stomach as dozens of eyes fixed on her with new intensity. She could see the mental calculations happening, her age, her composure, the way she handled the rifle with unconscious expertise. "Is that what you are?" Roy asked directly. "Some kind of military sniper?" Rebecca twisted the ring on her finger, feeling the familiar grooves. 3 years of carefully constructed normalcy, and it all came down to this moment. She could lie, deflect, maintain the fiction of ordinary Rebecca Anderson, or she could own the truth and deal with whatever came next. Jake's voice echoed in her memory. "Maybe it's time to show them who you really are." "I served," she said simply. "That was a long time ago." "Served where?" Charlie demanded. "Doing what?" "That's classified," Robert Hayes said firmly, surprising everyone. "And none of your damn business, Webb?" Charlie rounded on him. "How would you know what's classified?" Robert's smile was thin and dangerous because I recognized the signs. 26 years Army Rangers, 3 tours in Afghanistan. I know what real training looks like, and I know when to stop asking questions. The revelation hit the crowd like a shockwave. Rebecca felt a surge of gratitude toward the older man, but also a growing sense of inevitability. Her cover was blown, and there was no going back to the comfortable anonymity she'd built. "So what's the story?" Roy asked, his tone somewhere between hostile and genuinely curious. "You some kind of war hero playing dress-up?" "I'm someone who wanted to shoot at targets without being harassed," Rebecca replied, her voice carrying an edge that made several people step back. But apparently that was too much to ask. "You could have said something from the start," Charlie protested. "Would have saved everyone a lot of embarrassment." Rebecca's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Would it? Would you have believed me?" Or would you have found new ways to dismiss and belittle me? The question struck home, judging by the uncomfortable expressions around her. They all knew the answer, even if they wouldn't admit it. The real question, she continued, is what happens now? Do we finish this competition, or do you want to spend the rest of the day making excuses for why you got outshot by someone you never bothered to take seriously? Roy and Charlie exchanged glances, and Rebecca could see them wrestling with their options. They could demand she withdraw, claim some kind of unfair advantage. They could try to minimize her performance, explain it away as luck or fluke. Or they could face the final rounds knowing they were up against someone who'd made precision shooting a deadly art form. Competition continues, Robert Hayes announced, his voice carrying the authority of unofficial leadership. Lady earned her place here, same as anyone. What she did before doesn't change what happens next. The crowd began to disperse, but Rebecca could feel the weight of their attention like a physical thing. The secret was out, and there was no putting it back. For better or worse, the Angel of Kandahar had returned. The final rounds would determine not just who won the competition, but whether Rebecca could find a way to live with both versions of herself in the same skin. Word spread through the range like wildfire. By the time the advanced bracket was announced, Rebecca's military background had become the worst-kept secret in Texas shooting circles. She could feel phones buzzing as people texted friends, posted updates, and shared videos of her impossible accuracy. "This is insane," she heard one spectator tell another. "My buddy says she might be that sniper from Afghanistan, the one they called the Angel of something." Angel of Kandahar, Robert Hayes corrected quietly, appearing beside Rebecca, as she prepared for the final round. "That was you, wasn't it?" Rebecca looked at him sharply. "How do you know about classified operations? Because some stories make it through the intelligence community, even the ones that officially never happened." His expression was respectful, almost reverent. "What you and your team did at that forward operating base, it saved a lot of lives." The memory hit her like a physical blow. The weight of her rifle, the impossible distance, the knowledge that one missed shot would mean death for the soldiers pinned down below. She'd made that shot, and 7 others, in conditions that still gave her nightmares. "That was a different person," she said quietly. "Maybe. But she's the reason these people get to sleep safely in their beds." Robert glanced at the crowd, many of whom were still filming and whispering, "Don't let them make you ashamed of what you did." Before Rebecca could respond, the range officer called for final positions. The last round would be the ultimate test, moving targets at 300 yards with wind conditions that had several experienced shooters shaking their heads. As she walked to lane 7, Rebecca felt the crowd's attention like spotlights. The playful mockery had been replaced by something more complex, equal parts awe, resentment, and anticipation. They wanted to see what she could really do, even as part of them hoped she'd finally fail. Roy Patterson intercepted her halfway to the line. "Look," he said, his earlier hostility replaced by something that might have been grudging respect. "I was out of line earlier, way out of line, but this changes things, does it?" "Yeah, it does. You're not just some amateur we can laugh at anymore. You're a legitimate threat, and everyone knows it." He glanced around at the watching crowd. "Question is, what are you planning to do about it?" Rebecca followed his gaze, taking in the sea of phones, the expectant faces, the barely contained excitement of people witnessing something extraordinary. "I'm planning to shoot at your full capability." The question hung between them. Rebecca realized this was more than idle curiosity. Roy was asking whether she intended to dominate completely or give them a chance to save face. "I came here to shoot targets," she said finally. "That's what I'm going to do." Roy nodded slowly. "Fair enough. But just so you know, after this gets out, and it will get out, your quiet life is over. You ready for that?" Rebecca thought about Jake, about her job at the school, about the carefully constructed normalcy she'd built. All of it would change now, regardless of what happened in the next few minutes. "Guess I'll find out," she said. The targets were released, cardboard silhouettes, moving on cables at varying speeds and distances. The wind was gusting unpredictably, and even the most experienced shooters were struggling with the conditions. Rebecca took her position, shouldered the rifle, and felt the familiar calm descend. The noise of the crowd faded away, replaced by the meditative focus she'd learned in places where focus meant survival. The first target appeared, moving left to right at 250 yards. Rebecca tracked it smoothly, led the movement, and squeezed the trigger. The silhouette jerked as her bullet found center mass. A murmur ran through the crowd, but Rebecca was already tracking the second target. This one moved erratically, changing direction every few seconds. She waited, reading its pattern, and fired at the moment it paused. Another perfect hit. By the fifth target, the crowd had gone completely silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath as Rebecca demonstrated skills that belonged in movies, not at county shooting competitions. The final target was the most challenging, a smaller silhouette at maximum distance, moving in a figure-8 pattern. Rebecca watched it complete 2 cycles, calculating wind drift and timing. She had one shot to make it count. She exhaled slowly, found that perfect moment of stillness between heartbeats, and fired. The bullet caught the target dead center, stopping its movement with finality that made the crowd erupt in stunned applause. Rebecca lowered the rifle and turned to face them, her expression calm despite the chaos in her chest. The secret was fully out now, captured on dozens of phones, and already spreading across social media. There was no going back to being ordinary Rebecca Anderson. The Angel of Kandahar had returned whether she wanted to or not. The scoreboard didn't lie. Perfect score. 10 consecutive bullseyes on moving targets, conditions that had challenged seasoned shooters reduced to child's play by someone they dismissed as an amateur housewife just hours earlier. Rebecca stood in the center of a growing crowd, phones capturing every angle as the reality of what they'd witnessed sank in. The whispers had evolved from mockery to awe, but she could still hear the undercurrent of resentment from those who felt somehow cheated. "This isn't right," Charlie Webb announced loudly, pushing through the crowd with his jaw set in stubborn denial. "There's no way someone with that kind of training should be competing with regular civilians. It's like bringing a professional athlete to a pickup game." Murmurs of agreement rippled through parts of the crowd. Rebecca felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the same feeling she'd had in briefing rooms when officers questioned her qualifications, her right to be there, her very existence in spaces they considered theirs. "What are you suggesting?" she asked quietly. "I'm suggesting this whole thing was a setup," Charlie continued, encouraged by the supportive nods around him. "You came here knowing exactly what you could do, let us make fools of ourselves, then revealed your ace in the hole. That's not competition, that's manipulation." Manipulation? Rebecca's voice remained level, but something dangerous flickered in her eyes. "You want to talk about manipulation? Let's talk about the phones recording me without permission. Let's talk about the memes you posted mocking my stance. Let's talk about the assumptions you made based on nothing but your own prejudices." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Several people lowered their phones, suddenly aware they were recording something that might not end well. Roy Patterson stepped forward, and for a moment Rebecca thought he might support Charlie's accusations. Instead, he surprised everyone. "She's right," Roy said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet range. "We were assholes, all of us. We saw a woman, made assumptions, and treated her like a joke before she fired a single shot." "That's not the point," Charlie began. "It's exactly the point," Robert Hayes interrupted, his military bearing commanding attention. "You want to know what manipulation looks like? It's dismissing someone's capabilities because they don't fit your preconceptions. It's filming them hoping they'll fail so you can laugh about it later." Charlie's face reddened. "Fine, maybe we were rough around the edges. But that doesn't change the fact that she's essentially a professional competing in an amateur event." "Amateur event?" Rebecca finally stepped forward, and something in her movement made the crowd instinctively create more space. "You advertised this as a county championship open to all skill levels. I paid the same entry fee, followed the same rules, used the same equipment you provided. Where exactly does it say military veterans aren't allowed?" The question hung in the air because everyone knew the answer. It didn't. "Besides," Rebecca continued, her voice gaining strength, "you want to talk about fair? Let's talk about fair. Fair would have been treating me with basic respect from the moment I walked through that gate. Fair would have been offering helpful advice instead of condescending lectures. Fair would have been recognizing that skill comes from many sources, not just weekend hunting trips and YouTube videos." The crowd was completely silent now, many looking ashamed of their earlier behavior. "But you know what?" Rebecca's voice softened, and somehow that was more impactful than if she'd shouted. "I'm not angry about the disrespect. I'm not angry about the phones or the memes or the assumptions. I'm disappointed." She paused, letting that word settle. "I moved here for a fresh start. I wanted to be part of a community, to find my place among people who shared common interests. What I found instead were grown men so threatened by the possibility of a woman being competent that they had to tear her down before she even had a chance to prove herself." Charlie started to protest, but Rebecca held up a hand. "I'm not finished. You asked what kind of soldier I was? I was the kind who volunteered for the most dangerous missions to keep my fellow Americans safe. I was the kind who never missed when lives were on the line. I was the kind who earned a nickname by doing impossible things in impossible places because somebody had to, and I was the best person for the job." She gestured to the scoreboard. "This isn't my full capability. This is me holding back because I thought it might hurt people's feelings to be completely outclassed. But you know what I learned today? Some people's feelings aren't worth protecting." The silence was deafening. Even Charlie seemed to have run out of objections, his face cycling through emotions as the weight of her words sank in. "So here's what's going to happen," Rebecca continued, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed in life or death situations. "You're going to post this competition's results honestly. You're going to acknowledge that the person you mocked and dismissed earned first place through skill, training, and dedication. And maybe, just maybe, you'll think twice before you judge the next person who doesn't fit your narrow definition of what a shooter should look like." She turned to address the crowd as a whole. "I didn't come here to embarrass anyone or prove a point. I came here because my nephew believed I had something to offer, and he was tired of watching me hide from who I am. Today taught me that he was right, but not in the way any of us expected." Robert Hayes began to clap, slow, deliberate applause that gradually spread through the crowd. Even some of Charlie's supporters joined in, their earlier hostility replaced by grudging respect. Roy Patterson stepped forward. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology, a real one. What we did today was wrong, and there's no excuse for it." "Apology accepted," Rebecca said simply, But words are easy. What matters is what you do differently next time. The range officer approached with a trophy, a modest affair by most standards, but it represented something larger than the cheap metal suggested. Ms. Anderson, it's my honor to present you with first place in the Cedar County Shooting Championship. As she accepted the trophy, Rebecca felt the weight of dozens of phone cameras capturing the moment. By evening, this would be all over social media, but this time the story would be different. This time, it would be about a woman who'd been underestimated and had responded with quiet dignity and overwhelming competence. Charlie Webb, to his credit, finally stepped forward. "I was wrong," he said, his voice barely audible. "About everything. I'm sorry." Rebecca nodded, accepting his apology with the same grace she'd shown throughout the entire ordeal. "Thank you. That means something." As the crowd began to disperse, people approached her individually, some offering congratulations, others asking questions about her service, a few seeking advice about their own shooting technique. The hostility had evaporated, replaced by genuine curiosity and respect. Jake appeared at her elbow, grinning from ear to ear. "Aunt Becca, that was incredible. Did you see their faces when you—" "I saw," she said, ruffling his hair affectionately. "Thanks for pushing me to do this. Are you glad you came?" Rebecca looked around at the range, the dispersing crowd, the trophy in her hands. "Ask me tomorrow," she said, "when I figure out what my life looks like now." 3 weeks later, Rebecca sat in her kitchen at dawn, coffee steaming in her favorite mug, watching the sun paint the Texas sky in familiar shades of gold and amber. The routine was the same, but everything else had changed. Her phone buzzed constantly now, interview requests from military magazines, invitations to shooting competitions across the state, messages from other female veterans who'd seen the videos and wanted to share their own stories. The quiet life she'd built was gone, replaced by something she was still learning to navigate. "Morning, Aunt Becca," Jake said, shuffling into the kitchen with his usual teenage grace. But instead of grabbing cereal and rushing out, he sat down, across from her with a knowing smile. "You been getting emails again?" he observed, nodding toward her laptop. "Local gun range wants me to teach a women's safety course," she said, sipping her coffee. "And there's a girls' youth shooting program that needs instructors. You gonna do it?" Rebecca twisted the ring on her finger, a gesture that felt different now. Instead of anxiety, it reminded her of pride, of purpose, of a part of herself she'd tried to bury but finally learned to embrace. "I'm thinking about it." The truth was, she'd already made up her mind. The week after the competition, 3 young women had approached her at the grocery store, asking if she'd be willing to teach them basic firearms safety. 2 were college students who wanted to feel more secure walking to their cars at night. The 3rd was a single mother whose ex-husband had been making threats. She'd spent Saturday afternoon with them at a different range, one whose owner had called to apologize for the behavior at Lone Star and invite her to use his facilities any time. Watching those women gain confidence, seeing their fear transform into competence, had reminded Rebecca why she'd served in the first place. "The school called yesterday," Jake mentioned casually. "Principal wants to talk to you about something." Rebecca's stomach tightened. She'd been expecting this conversation, the one where her quiet administrative job became incompatible with her newfound notoriety. What kind of something? "They want you to start a marksmanship club. Apparently, half the student body has been asking about it since the videos went viral." Relief flooded through her. "Really? Really? Oh, and Coach Patterson wants to know if you'd be interested in helping with the ROTC program's shooting team." Rebecca blinked. "Patterson? As in Roy Patterson's younger brother?" "Yeah. Turns out Roy felt so bad about what happened that he called his brother and recommended you personally." Jake grinned. Apparently, Roy's been telling everyone who'll listen that you're the best shooter he's ever seen and that he was an idiot for not recognizing it immediately. The irony wasn't lost on her. The man who'd mocked her stance and questioned her abilities was now her biggest advocate. Her laptop chimed with another email. This one was from Robert Hayes, the retired ranger, who'd recognized her skill and stood up for her when others doubted. "Rebecca," it read, "hope you're settling into your new reality, okay? Wanted you to know there's a group of us military folks who meet monthly for coffee and conversation. Nothing formal, just people who understand what it's like to transition back to civilian life. You'd be welcome anytime. Also, my daughter's getting married next month, and she specifically asked me to invite that badass woman from the shooting range to the reception. Her words, not mine. Let me know if you're interested." Rebecca smiled, realizing she'd found something she hadn't even known she was looking for. Community. Not just any community, but one that saw her completely and accepted both versions of herself. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed Lone Star Range. "Ms. Anderson, this is Tommy from the range. I hope I'm not calling too early." "Not at all. What can I do for you?" "Well, we've been doing some thinking since the competition. About how we handled things, about the culture here, about what we want to represent going forward." Tommy paused. "We'd like to offer you a position. Part-time instructor, consultant on inclusive policies, maybe help us develop some programs for underrepresented groups, if you're interested." Rebecca looked out the window at the sunrise, thinking about all the roads that had led her to this moment. The painful decision to leave military service, the years of trying to be someone smaller than she was, the nephew who'd refused to let her hide, the competition that had forced her to choose between comfort and authenticity. "I'm interested," she said. "Let's talk." After hanging up, she sat quietly for a moment, absorbing the magnitude of the change. 3 weeks ago, she'd been Rebecca Anderson, the quiet administrative assistant who filed papers and answered phones. Now, she was Rebecca Anderson, veteran, instructor, role model, but still the same woman who made terrible coffee and worried about Jake's driving. The difference was that now she didn't have to choose between those identities. She could be both, fully and without apology. Jake checked his watch and grabbed his backpack. "I'm proud of you, you know," he said, pausing at the door. "Not for the shooting, that was awesome, but for not backing down. For showing them who you really are." "Thank you," she said softly, "for not letting me stay hidden." After he left, Rebecca opened her laptop and began typing responses to the emails that would shape her new life. A life where the Angel of Kandahar and Rebecca Anderson weren't separate people, but different facets of the same complex, capable, fully realized woman. Outside, the sun climbed higher, burning off the morning haze and revealing the clear, bright day ahead. Rebecca smiled, twisted her ring one last time for luck, and got to work building the future she'd never dared to imagine. The quiet life was gone, but what had taken its place was something infinitely more valuable, a life lived without shame, without hiding, without making herself smaller to make others comfortable. It was, she realized, the life she'd earned the right to live. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.